What if the very walls around you whispered threats, your bedsheets tore themselves away, and an invisible force carved a deadly message into your bedroom wall? This is exactly what happened to 18-year-old Esther Cox in 1878. In the small town of Amherst, Nova Scotia, nearly 100 witnesses saw the terrifying events, and their story remains one of Canada's most chilling mysteries. On several terrifying nights, the bedsheets ripped themselves off Esther, flying across the room despite her family's desperate attempt to hold them down. This happened multiple times. Whatever was doing this, it was getting stronger and invisible. Scratched into the plaster wall above her bed, carved by something no one could see, were 7 words that made everyone's blood run cold. Esther Cox, you are mine to kill. And not long after that, the fires began. This was Amherst, Nova Scotia in 1878. A quiet town where nothing extraordinary ever happened, where families went to church on Sundays and neighbors knew each other's business. Where the most exciting event of the week was usually the arrival of the mail coach. But inside a perfectly ordinary cottage on Princess Street, something was happening that would challenge everything. The local doctor had come to examine Esther, convinced he could explain away what the family was claiming. He was a man of science after all. There had to be a rational explanation for their wild stories about moving furniture and mysterious sounds. But as he stood in the bedroom, watching a pillow being pulled out from under the girl's head by invisible hands, watching it straighten itself out and return to its proper position, his confidence began to crumble. Then he heard something scratching. Everyone in the room turned towards the wall as the sound of something sharp scraped against the plaster, letter by letter, word by word. The message appeared before their eyes. The doctor's hands shook as he stared at the wall. This was impossible. This defied everything he understood about medicine, about physics, about reality itself, but it was just the beginning. Over the next several months, nearly 100 people would witness what happened in that house. Clergymen, skeptics, curiosity seekers, and scientists. They came expecting to debunk an obvious hoax. They left questioning everything they thought they knew. Objects flew through the air in broad daylight, fires ignited without any source of flame. Voices spoke from empty rooms, and at the center of it all was Esther Cox, a young woman who seemed as terrified and confused as everyone else. The phenomena only happened when Esther was present. Wherever she went, the chaos would follow. When she left, everything stopped. It was as if something had attached itself to her, something that refused to let her go. The town of Amherst had no idea what they were dealing with. Some believed it was the devil himself. Others suspected an elaborate trick. But as the events escalated and as the witnesses multiplied, one thing became clear. Whatever was happening to Esther Cox was about to turn their quiet little community upside down. And the entity responsible had made its intentions perfectly clear. It had carved them into the wall for everyone to see. It wanted Esther Cox, and it was willing to kill to get her. What had started as strange noises in the night was about to become something far more sinister, because in the coming weeks, the threats would escalate. The fires would spread, and Esther Cox would discover that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones no one else can see. But first, let's understand how it all began. What happened to Esther Cox on that August evening in 1878 would trigger a chain of events that still have investigators searching for answers nearly 150 years later. The Teed cottage on Princess Street looked like any other home in Amherst. 2 stories, timber framed, surrounded by well-maintained lawns. Inside lived Daniel and Olive Teed, and their 2 young sons, Willie and George. But that house was crowded. Daniel's brother John lived there too, along with 3 of Olive's siblings, William, James, and 18-year-old Esther Cox. They were a religious family, well respected in the community. Olive was known for keeping an immaculate house, and Esther often helped care for her little nephews. To anyone looking from the outside, they were living a perfectly normal, unremarkable life. That normalcy shattered on August 28, 1878. That evening, Esther went out for a carriage ride with Bob McNeil, a local shoemaker, courting her. It should have been a nice, quiet night away from the crowded house, but when she came home, she was soaked, trembling and pale with fear. She rushed straight to her bed without saying a word to anyone about what had happened. McNeil had driven her into the isolated woods outside of town. There, he pulled out a revolver and threatened her, making demands that left her fearing for her life. Only the sound of another wagon approaching in the distance had saved her from whatever McNeil had planned. He drove her home in tense silence and left town the very next day, never to be seen in Amherst again. 4 days later, after the incident, Esther was withdrawn and tearful. Her family assumed that she and Bob had simply quarreled and hoped she would recover from what they believed was ordinary heartbreak. They had no idea of the horror she had lived through. But something had changed in Esther Cox that night. The trauma had somehow opened a door that should have remained closed. A week after the carriage ride, Esther and her sister Jane were settling into bed when they heard rustling sounds coming from underneath them. Esther thought there was a mouse in the mattress, so both the sisters searched thoroughly, but found nothing. The next night, the sounds returned. They traced the noise to a pasteboard box filled with patchwork that was stored under the bed. They pulled the box out and placed it in the center of the room, expecting a mouse to scurry out. Instead, they watched in shock as the box suddenly jumped a foot into the air before crashing back down. Jane, thinking there must be some explanation, carefully returned the box to its original position. It immediately leaped into the air again. Their screams brought Daniel running, but he dismissed their story as nonsense and pushed the box back under the bed. Jane and Esther exchanged glances, knowing that they had witnessed something impossible, but unable to make anyone else believe them. The next night, everything changed. Esther woke up feeling violently ill. She screamed for Jane, crying that she felt like she was dying. When Jane lit the lamps, she was horrified by what she saw. In the center of the room, her hair stood on end, her face flushed red, eyes bulging as if ready to burst. Her fingernails gouged deep trenches into the wooden chair, as if she were holding on for her life. The rest of the household came running, but no one knew what to do. Esther was writhing in pain, gasping in a hoarse voice that she was swelling up, that she was going to explode. But then, right in front of them, her body started to expand. Her hands and her face swelled dramatically, her skin burning hot to the touch while her face grew deathly pale. Agonized screams poured from her mouth as her entire body seemed to double in size. The family froze, gripped by sheer terror. They had never seen anything like this. Then out of nowhere, a sound like thunder crashed through the house. Everyone thought lightning had struck the cottage and rushed to investigate. But there was no storm outside. As Olive stepped towards the window and pulled the curtain aside, another blast of thunder hit, louder than the first, and the whole room shook. In an instant, Esther's body returned to normal, and she collapsed into a deep sleep. 4 nights later, it all started again, but this time things escalated. As soon as Esther's swelling began, the bedclothes flew off the bed, like something invisible had yanked them away. Olive tried to pull the sheets back over her, but they were ripped off again, just as violently. Then, out of nowhere, a pillow flew from under Esther's bed and smacked John Teed square in the face. He bolted from the room without saying a word. It got so bad that the only way to keep the bedding in place was for the family members to sit on the bed and physically hold everything down. They stayed like that for several agonizing minutes while the chaos unfolded around them, until, just like before, a deafening bang shook the house. And then it all stopped. Esther went completely still. The swelling vanished. Everything was back to normal. So naturally, the family was desperate for answers. They called in the local physician, hoping that medical science could explain what they were experiencing. The doctor examined Esther and concluded she was suffering from nervous excitement brought on by some recent shock. He declared confidently that there was nothing supernatural in the house. As soon as he finished speaking, the pillow under Esther's head started to move. Dr. Criddle could only stare as it slowly slid out from underneath her, then almost gently floated back into place like someone was carefully adjusting it. But when it started moving again, John Teed jumped in and grabbed it with both hands, determined not to let go. Whatever was on the other end, though, was stronger, much stronger. The pillow was ripped out from under his grip with such force that his hair literally stood on end. Then the real chaos began. The room exploded with sound, loud bangs, rustling, things moving with no one touching them. The walls seemed to shudder with every thunderous knock, while a sinister whisper slithered through the air, too low to understand but impossible to ignore. The bedsheets were torn off again, right in front of the doctor's eyes. And then came the sound that chilled them all to the bone. Slow, deliberate scratching coming from the wall. Everyone turned to look. And right there, in the plaster next to Esther's bed, they watched as something invisible carved 7 words into the wall. Esther Cox, you are mine to kill. A chunk of plaster broke off mid-carving and spun across the room, landing at Dr. Criddle's feet. Then came more knocking. Loud, relentless, like sledgehammers slamming into the wall. The entire house shook under the weight of it. Esther lay frozen in bed, just as terrified as everyone else. This went on for 2 straight hours, and then, just like that, silence. Esther finally drifted off to sleep and Dr. Criddle walked out of the house a different man. He couldn't explain what he had just seen, but he knew without a doubt that it defied everything he'd ever been taught in medical school. He came back the next night, this time with heavy sedatives, hoping to calm whatever was tormenting her, but the drugs did nothing. If anything, things got worse. The banging grew louder, more violent, so loud in fact that Dr. Criddle could hear it from 200 yards away. It sounded like someone was up in the roof, slamming it with a sledgehammer. But when they stepped outside and looked up, the roof was empty, not a soul inside. Whispers turned into rumors, and then rumors turned into crowds. Something unexplainable was happening at the Teed cottage, and no one wanted to miss it. And it wasn't just at night anymore. The mysterious sounds, knocks, bangs, rustlings were happening at all hours. Curious neighbors started gathering outside the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was going on. As the weeks passed, the family became convinced that they were dealing with some kind of intelligent entity. It seemed to hear and understand them, responding to their questions through a system of knocks. When Daniel asked how many people were in the room, 5 distinct raps would sound. There were indeed 5 people present, and Esther's face was buried in her pillow, making it impossible for her to see who was there. But one detail kept coming up, and it was impossible to ignore. The activity only happened when Esther was there. The moment she stepped out of the house, even for a few hours, everything stopped. Total silence. It was becoming obvious that whatever this force was, it was somehow attached to her. It followed her wherever she went. Soon, more than just neighbors were showing up. Respectable witnesses, doctors, ministers, skeptics began arriving to see it for themselves. One of them was Dr. Edwin Clay, a well-known Baptist clergyman. He came in doubtful, but left a believer. He saw the knockings, he saw the writing, and just like Dr. Criddle before him, he was convinced. Esther wasn't faking it, and her family wasn't helping her pull off some elaborate hoax. But not everyone was as easily convinced. Some townspeople insisted that Esther was a fraud, staging everything for attention. Others whispered that she had some kind of hypnotic power, forcing people to see things that weren't really there. Her family was forced to call police to their home repeatedly to disperse the crowds of curious seekers who gathered outside their windows. Then, for the first time, it spoke. One night, as Esther lay in the bed with her sister Jane, she whispered that she could hear a voice talking to her. According to Esther, this voice claimed to have once lived on Earth, but had been dead for years. And then it promised to set fire to the house that very night. While the family debated what to do with this threat, a lit match suddenly dropped from the ceiling and landed right on the bed. They managed to put it out immediately, but then another fell, and another. Over the next 10 minutes, 8 matches appeared out of thin air and dropped onto the floor, the bed, the table, everywhere. Thankfully, none of them sparked a fire. That was the moment Daniel decided to confront it, using the knocks they'd come to recognize. He asked, was the house really going to be burned? 3 knocks confirmed, yes. 5 minutes later, smoke started drifting through the house. The acrid scent of burning wood filled the air, and the windows rattled violently, though the night was still and silent outside. A dress belonging to Esther that had been hanging near the door was somehow removed from the nail, rolled into a bundle, and shoved under the bed before anyone could retrieve it. The fabric burst into flames. They managed to put it out, but the message couldn't have been clearer. This wasn't just about fear anymore. Something or someone was trying to hurt them. 3 days later, the threats escalated. Esther and Olive were washing dishes in the kitchen when smoke suddenly started billowing up from the cellar. Olive ran downstairs and found a barrel of wood shavings fully ablaze, flames nearly reaching the ceiling. The heat was so intense they had to run from the house and call for help. And then, out of nowhere, a man no one recognized, someone no one had seen in town before, threw off his coat and ran straight into the burning house. He somehow got the fire under control, but before anyone could thank him, he was gone. Didn't give his name, never came back, no one ever found out who he was. Those fires were the final straw for the Teed family. They were terrified that their home would burn down with their young children inside. Faced with threats to Willie and George's safety, Daniel and Olive made the heartbreaking decision to ask Esther to leave their home. But where would she go? Would leaving actually solve anything, or would the entities simply follow her wherever she went? As it turned out, they were about to discover that Esther Cox's nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was about to get much, much worse. In January 1879, John White, a kind-hearted local restaurant owner, offered to take Esther into his home. For 3 weeks, everything seemed normal. The family began to hope that whatever had been tormenting them had finally moved on. They were wrong. When the phenomena returned, they came back with a vengeance that made the previous events seem mild by comparison. Objects now disappeared before people's eyes in broad daylight, only to reappear across the room moments later. A scrubbing brush vanished from Esther's hands and fell from the ceiling, striking her on the head. Heavy furniture was thrown around White's dining room with such force that doors were ripped off their hinges. But the physical attacks on Esther herself were becoming increasingly violent. She was constantly being slapped, scratched, and pricked by invisible hands. The marks appeared on her skin as witnesses watched, red welts rising where nothing had touched her. Then came the incident that convinced even the most hardened skeptics that something genuinely supernatural was happening. Esther was stabbed in the back with a clasp knife. John White's son Fred saw the blade pierce her clothing and flesh and immediately pulled the weapon from the wound, placing it securely in his own pocket. Within seconds, the knife somehow removed itself from Fred's pocket and stabbed Esther again in the exact same spot, diving the blade deeper into the original wound. Multiple witnesses saw this happen. There was no way for anyone to fake such an event. No possibility of trickery or sleight of hand. A knife had somehow moved itself from a man's pocket and used itself as a weapon, all while everyone in the room was watching. As word of the strange events spread beyond Amherst, newspapers picked up the story, and curious investigators began arriving from all over. One of them was Walter Hubbard, Hubble, an American actor and writer who came expecting an expose or hoax. But instead of that, Hubble claimed he saw objects fly through the air, fires start from nowhere, and Esther attacked by invisible forces, screaming as pins and needles drove into her skin. He even claimed to communicate with multiple spirits through the knocking system. The main voice called itself Bob Nickel, supposedly a shoemaker. Others gave names like Peter Cox, Maggie Fisher, and Eliza McNeil, but one name stood out. Bob Nickel sounded eerily close to Bob McNeil, the man who had assaulted Esther. Was it connected to her trauma or just trying to terrify her? Either way, Hubble left convinced something real and dangerous was haunting Esther Cox. Trying to find a normal life, she started to work with Arthur Davison, a local farmer. For a brief time, it seemed like the phenomena might finally be coming to an end. Then Davidson's barn burnt down. Esther was nearby when the flames erupted, and given her past, everyone thought they knew exactly who to blame. Davison accused her of arson, and she was arrested, tried, and convicted. The judge sentenced her to 4 months in jail, and from the moment Esther Cox entered the prison cell, all supernatural activity ceased completely. For the first time in over a year, there were no mysterious sounds, no moving objects, no spontaneous fires. Whatever had been tormenting her seemed unable or unwilling to follow her behind bars. She walked free a month later, but the thing, whatever it was, never came back. Esther went on to live a quiet, normal life, marrying twice, raising 2 children. She eventually moved to Massachusetts, where she died in 1912 at the age of 52. For the rest of her life, she refused to discuss the events that had made her famous. Some say it was poltergeist activity. Others believe it was the trauma of assault, manifesting as physical phenomena. But whatever it was, it left a mark on Canadian history. And even today, nearly 150 years later, people still ask, what happened to Esther Cox? Do you think Esther was haunted, or was something haunting her mind? Let me know what you believe in the comments, and I will see you guys next time.